It is extraordinarily hard to make a watch. You have, in a simple watch, a simple mechanical watch, at least 100 pieces in the movement. And all of those pieces have tolerances that are in the range of a couple of microns. Some even tighter tolerances. And those are just the dimensional tolerances. Then you have, on top of that, all of the decoration. These parts don't just have to work, they have to look beautiful. They have to respect the hundreds of years of watchmaking because you're using somebody else's invention. You're using the Swiss lever, you're using the balance wheel and the hairspring. So you really have to make sure that everything that you do keeps up that tradition. Weiss from Weiss Watch Company. I have always been fascinated in watches, but now I've been actually watchmaking for about 10 years. I first kind of became fascinated with watches when my aunt actually had me take apart a watch. It was a quartz watch that my dad had taken in a jacuzzi and it's fogged up. And we happened to be at her house and she said, we should take this apart, like a little fun project. So we took it apart and it was just computerized guts and little circuitry and things that were fried and rusted now. But I ended up cutting a picture, just a Polaroid picture, into a circle and putting it into the face of the watch and closing it back up. And that was one of my first experiences with watches as more than just an item that you have. It was something that you could interact with at that point. I can always find something really cool in almost any watch. So there wasn't like one watch that really got me until the Ulysse Dardenne Freak was a watch that fascinated me because the time-telling display and you could see the insides from the front. That one is what made me decide to go to watchmaking school, so that was when I had to figure out and learn more. After I saw that watch, I decided I wanted to pursue watchmaking. I didn't know what that meant at the time, and it actually took me quite a few years to figure out watchmaking school and how to properly get an education and become a watchmaker. It's not something that's normal in the US. We're kind of an odd bunch. There's not very many of us. When you go to Switzerland, you could wander around and end up in a bar and meet a watchmaker. There's plenty of them. In the US, it's very rare that I meet another watchmaker. This is actually my first American issue white dial watch. The final day of assembly, it was something I will never forget. I was locked in the room over here, just like in the zone at my workbench, and it kind of brought me back to working at Vacheron, where my bench was. I looked out across the courtyard, and this is like snowy Geneva, and I could see across the way there was another watchmaker in his own office, all alone, and I didn't know what he did, so I asked somebody, and they said he's prototyping movements. He's one of the most highly skilled watchmakers there who is able to take these parts and make sure everything's perfect and actually put the watch together and get it to work. And that requires a lot of hand fitment when you're first starting out. So I was doing this, and the whole time I was thinking about that guy in that workshop that I saw when I was at Vacheron, and it made me feel really good about what we had accomplished here, that we have that happening in this workshop. And I got the watch together and it was ticking, which was amazing. It was the first one that ever ticked. Before that, we go together and there's something, it doesn't fit here, it's touching here, there's too much friction there. So to have one that actually goes together and it runs, is probably the best feeling I will ever have as a watchmaker. I got the inspiration for the field watch from old pocket watches I've collected over the years. and also old watches that were more like instruments. Something that would have been on your wrist diving, or something that was in the cockpit of an airplane. Even our logo is actually, if you look at it, it is like looking at the wings of an airplane from above, the shape of Weiss. So it's a lot of aviation inspiration because of all the instrumentation that went into old aircraft. So one of the watches that I've always loved is the Rolex Submariner. I think a lot of people love that watch. But for me, it's like the quintessential gauge. And the one that I have, and hopefully will always have and will eventually hand down, is a 5512. And this watch is from before you had any kind of dive equipment that was electronic. So this is something that was actually required to dive. You needed to know how long you were under water for. A lot of bad things could happen if you didn't have a watch that was reliable enough to dive with. So that's definitely a watch that I love and took a lot of inspiration from. This is an old one. It's my father's Mickey Mouse watch, and it's actually from the 50s. And because it's from the 50s, it's also a mechanical movement. I have a Mickey Mouse watch that was mine as a kid, but it's a quartz. I'd love to have this one because it's so old, and it was like a little kid had a mechanical watch. He was, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years old when he had this, and it was mechanical. But at that time, that was normal. So it wasn't necessarily the same kind of idea that we hold in our heads today about a mechanical watch being a fine timepiece. It was just a watch, and a little kid had it. I know of 2 other watchmakers that make movements in the US. I mean, between the 3 of us, there's not that many watchmakers who have connected enough of those puzzle pieces to make movements. Switzerland has always been a big part of my watchmaking experience. The school that I went to is a Swiss school. I learned complicated watches from a Swiss instructor, but I was also taught by a German instructor as well. And I remember kind of the collectors you would talk to would like to say, you know, the best watches aren't coming from Switzerland anymore, they're coming from Germany. And that was kind of like an insider thing, was to know that Swiss watches might not be the best. There's other watchmakers in other parts of the world that make amazing watches. And for me, that kind of created this light at the end of the tunnel where maybe someday there will be insiders saying, you know, the best watches, they're actually coming out of the United States, or maybe even the best watches are coming out of Los Angeles, I don't know. But hopefully at some point that'll happen.